So I know many of you are parents. Almost everybody who listens to me are parents, whether they're of young kids, of adult kids, kids you're pushing out of the nest, and you know if you're like me, I made it up almost the whole way along the way. Read a couple books, but I didn't have a lot of guidance. And I got to meet a new friend, and I've been doing research on him. And the more I learned about him, the more I thought he needs to be on my show. He needs to talk to you about parenting, about children, and about everything. And I told him before we got on that we could probably do 3 or 4 shows on all the areas of his expertise, but we're going to focus down a little bit today. So I'm going to read his introduction because it's so intricate. There's so much there. I want you to know exactly who this guy is, besides just being a sweetheart of a human being. Uh, Dr. Ali Lankerani, have I said that right?
That was perfect, Mark.
Dr. Ali Lankarani, or Dr. L, as he loves to be called, is a clinical neuroscientist. He's called the parent whisperer, which I love because the first thing I learned about parenting was that it's all me. It's not the kids. The kids are perfect. It's all me. So Dr. L is an internationally published best-selling author. He's a speaker. He's a coach. He was twice voted one of America's top doctors. He's host of the TV channel Role Model Maker, and he ran an award-winning practice helping kids on the autism spectrum with their disorders and their development. He currently runs online programs, so you don't actually have to come see him. He's online, so when you fall in love with him now, as I think you're going to, you're going to be able to find him. He helps he helps you, he helps your children. He encourages healthy development and growing relationships. Personally, he enjoys being an active father of 2 little kids, and proudly serves as the founder of Amazing Parents Network. It just goes on and on and on. His mission is to promote brain-based healthcare options to support parents and their children to foster their optimum potential and their quest for personal fulfillment. You can find him regularly speaking at a variety of venues in health, lifestyle, and personal, as well as child development. Like I said, Dr. Lakarani, Dr. L, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mark. That was awesome.
I read all that because you really have, you know, you dove in. Like this is your passion, helping parents, helping children, and your kids are little. So why did you choose this path? Because you chose it before you had children. Why is this so important to you to be this involved in people's lives?
Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be here and talk about my passions. It's always fun for me to do that. And to answer your question, of course, when it comes to parenting, we always think that it has something to do with our kids and our interest in our kids. But really, it actually had to do with me and my personal interests and where I come from. And the story kind of goes back to my grandfather, my dad's dad, basically. And when I was growing up, we used to go there during summer times, every single holiday, and you know we had a large family, and everybody would show up there. And I definitely enjoyed just being in his house, and he was this central figure that everybody kind of flocked to. And later on, what ended up happening is as I grew up and I realized not everybody got to have that and got to experience that. There are people that have families that might not necessarily be together or as extensive. And then I grew up even further. I moved from Iran. This is where my grandfather was. And I moved to the United States. And about 10 years ago, I actually had to make a trip back to Iran for business purposes. And when I went there, the people that I met in this city, they would all talk highly of him and what a family guy he was, that he would literally bring people, invite them over like entire summers to just be there and everything. So that whole concept of having this being this figure that people are drawn to you and you draw people and invite people was really interesting to me. And then people always talked very highly of his proverbs and his knowledge and wisdom. And, that's something that seems to be lacking more and more as the years have gone by and this generational gap has increased over years, basically. So now we have parents that are becoming parents later on in life. And then the grandparents also are not as active, it seems like, as they used to be in participating in their grandkids' development and
Yeah,
upbringing and
my
things
my
like that.
parent my parents were quite old when my kids were growing up, so they didn't participate in the way
Right.
that would have been fun.
Right. And then I had a wake up call a few years back with my health challenges because here I was, I wanted to basically reinstill that fatherly figure that my grandfather had role modeled so well. And what ended up happening is I had a wake up call because when my son was 2 years old, I got this blood test that showed that at the rate that my health was deteriorating, I might not have been able to be around to see him when it comes to his high school graduation.
Wow.
So I had to do something drastic about that. And of course, my background with what my parents had to go through raising me as a child who had autism spectrum disorder, ADHD basically. I was not an easy child. So I saw what my parents had to go through. And sometimes you come into parenting with such joy and anticipation. And then sometimes the challenges kind of take the fun out of it
Right.
for you.
I didn't find out, by the way, I didn't find out that I was ADD until we tested my kids, and we tested me just so that they wouldn't feel weird. And the doctor was like, how do you even function?
Yeah, exactly. So these all culminated between the practice, how I was raised, and my grandfather, and then my wake up call in health to realize that you know what, not everybody knows parenting, and it's kind of like it's what you were exposed to, and you kind of piecemeal it as you get up. It's like I'm never gonna do that again, or I'm never gonna be like him, or I really want to be like him when I grow up, and you kind of piecemeal this thing together without any science, rhyme, reason, or it's just a bunch of opinions that seems to come together. So basically, in my experience over the past 10 years, that's what I have done. I've kind of created what I did with the practice and the health, creating this brain based approach to what's good for the brain is good for the body, and then how you show up in life, basically. And that's basically where this program started.
Did I just hear you say that ADHD is on the autism spectrum?
ADHD, ADD, dyslexia, Tourette's, Asperger's, um, there, and then autism, of course, itself. These are all on the spectrum. And also, there are other components that oftentimes people don't necessarily connect, like anxiety, depression, and some digestive related issues and autoimmune disorders also happen to be co-complications as well.
This is not a direction I expected to go, but I'm totally fascinated with just the challenges because I know so many kids. I know what my children dealt with, and I know so many people with kids who have anxiety now. Now, of course, we're recording this in the middle of the COVID epidemic. People are homeschooling. Tensions are high anyway. Uh, so how do you find out that your kid just isn't anxious or dealing with something external and it really is something that needs to be addressed medically?
Okay. So let me just briefly talk about how the brain comes to develop, basically. Now, we are one of the few species that when we are born, our brain is not fully developed, basically, and it needs a couple of years to develop. And in that process, what our brain, what any species brain does, is it takes the signals from the outside and brings it in and tries to make sense of it and re-emulate what the world really looks like inside the brain, because you got to think your brain is not really attached to anything
Mm,
outside. So it has to take these signals and go ahead and recreate the world inside itself. And what ends up happening is you have timing and coordination. Different parts of the brain have to work together. And if that metronome, that timer is a little off, then two pictures that come in might come in at different times. So you will not get the causality of this one causing this one or these two being related together. So when kids are growing up, oftentimes when they're on the spectrum, what ends up happening is they might perceive these signals, but the time it takes for their brain to put things together is a little off.
right.
So in their mind, they create a reality which might be a little different than you and I's.
So that
So
that goes
they're
with the premise of everything I talk about is that we all actually process everything different with our brains. So we all live
exactly,
in different worlds. But
exactly.
when you talk about these conditions, that this is something that's actually just so acute that you can see the difference between.
Right. Well, usually what you end up seeing is, like, for instance, academic or behavioral issues. So to the child, their response to the world they perceived is absolutely normal.
Right.
But to everybody else, that is not the proper response because there's this connection that's missing inside that brain. So what ends up happening is the kids learn that what I do is either not good enough or improper, but they don't understand why. And as they get older, and if that is not being caught, if that is not something that is being addressed or highlighted, what ends up happening is the kid thinks that they're just not good enough,
You
or
just
that
you,
they're
you just made a light bulb go off in my head, because as a parent, if I'm not dealing with any of that stuff, I'm somewhere in the very normal range. I'm trying to assimilate my child who lives in a different world to my world, right?
right.
So I'm trying to get him to my rhythm where he has a completely different rhythm, and it just the compassion for that impossibility is really shown up in this conversation.
Exactly. So what ends up happening is that child starts developing either anxiety for the fear that they're going to do something wrong, or they're going to be depressed in the sense that what they do is never good enough.
I
And
yeah, I watched it with my son with ADHD, and then he had a specific learning disability where he couldn't process what was written on the board to his notes. He couldn't
mm,
take what was on, like he was smart, but he couldn't take what was on the board and put it in on paper and notes. So like that's the world he lives in.
right, right. So it's very common for people who have autism disorder or autism spectrum disorder to exhibit some signs and symptoms of anxiety and depression, not because they have it, but because of that. Now, they're also more prone because remember, I mentioned that timer, that metronome. If the metronome happens to tick too fast, then you're too much into the future. That's anxiety. If it clicks too slow, then you're always in the past. That's depression. So, because you're always reflecting back to what you did, or you're always projecting forward to what's going to happen. So those kind of things can happen as well.
If I'm not showing up, so quickly with the questions, you've got me thinking so much. I'm fascinated with that. Uh, so let's. I don't even know what to ask about that. I'm just so
Well, Mark,
completely taken with what you're saying.
before we started, remember we were talking about the greatest part of what we do is seeing that light bulb go on and seeing that change. And that's why I left private practice because I saw that the most valuable thing I could do for the parents was to make that light bulb go on instead of going weeks and weeks of therapy and treatment.
No,
Because
for me, I tell you what, I'm almost to tears with compassion for the parents, for children, for my own raising my children. Like let's forget that even if our kids are not on the spectrum, we're all on some sort of spectrum. So we all live in our own worlds. And I'm trying to parent my kid into my world instead
exactly.
of getting their world and parenting them so they can live in their world. And it just so the whole thing is just, you've done what very few people can do anymore, is spin me on my head. Um,
And then this is where the parenting style comes in because depending on the parenting style, every parenting style has its strengths and weaknesses. And if you are really on control, this could be a really frustrating experience for you to try to control this brain without this knowledge. And then if you're a hands off, that also could backfire in its own way, basically. So then now goes back to the parenting, and it's like, okay, well, life throws us curveballs all the time. What do we do? You could have a brother and a sister, same parents, but completely different, right? And so one parenting style might work for one, and it might completely set the other person off. So how do you decide how to address these things?
Yeah, I do know my ex-wife and I constantly talked. Both our kids had to be parented 100% differently. They needed a different set of parents, and it was really interesting to do. So do you have information on all this on your website, and places for people to get resources? Uh,
I definitely do. I mean, the website is a good place to come to learn a little bit about what we do and everything. I also have two Facebook groups. The one that we're talking about today is called Partnership and Parenting 101. And basically, my motto for that is for anybody who didn't get the parenting owner's manual, you
yeah,
should be on that
which is
page.
nobody. So I'm actually going to I'll put all those links in the show notes so people can join your community and find you. Again, I'm still a little speechless of the realization I had from your talking. So let's talk a little bit current. So right now, everybody that I know who has children at home are at their wits' end. Homeschooling, like the littler kids, they can't get their kids to sit down and do any of the lessons, so they're losing, supposedly air quotes losing ground.
Mhm.
Um, the anxiety, the non-social. What are you suggesting to people these days as they're trying to parent in almost impossible times? What are you seeing, and what are you giving advice on?
Okay. I appreciate that question. It's a very good question. I really like the opportunity to actually talk about this. So, one of the things is, and this is a good and a bad, and the good part is that, what we used to have in place before COVID wasn't necessarily addressing it. That's why we had the issues that we had with school and violence and all the bullying, all the other stuff that was happening. On the other hand, the bad part is now because the kids are home, for instance, that responsibility happens to be bared more by parents that are super busy as it is. But nevertheless, understanding what needs to happen, regardless of whether they go to school or at home, is the same thing. And this goes back to making sure that you address the health of the child first. Because if you're going to ask the child to perform, when I had my practice and I wanted to rewire the kids' brains and get them to do a task that their brain had never done before, I couldn't do that if their brain didn't have the connections, wasn't supported enough to perform those tasks. Just like any other thing, that foundation is not there, so the building would collapse, right? So in the case of children who their brain is still developing, in order for them to learn, they need these fundamentals for their brain to be supported. They need proper nutrition, proper rest, adequate amount of oxygenation. So you got to make sure that they're breathing. If they're mouth breathers or if their air quality is not good, those things are important. And then if those are there, then the last part, which is the main driver of brain development, is actually movement.
Hmm.
And this is something that really wasn't being addressed in the old system. And now in the new system, we complain about this, the distance learning, but that also is opening up the windows for you to also provide an environment where the kids can actually go ahead and move and potentially actually learn as they move. For instance, things like little balance discs or sitting on the physio ball or those therapy balls. Those kind of things would be a way that they couldn't have done that in school before, basically. So that's one way. The other one is you can go ahead and adjust their schedule so that they can do their learning when their brain is fresh as opposed to when it's tired,
When
making sure
was
that.
so school is usually from like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Is that optimal? Or
So that is a good time, but the way we have traditionally done school, we used to have recess, the kids would move around. Now, if you're just sitting in front of a screen, that is not optimal.
mm-mm.
So if you actually in this particular area go back to people who actually have a bit more experience on this, which is the population that has done things like homeschooling in the past, what you're going to find out is that the 15-minute classroom followed by another 15-minute classroom doesn't really transfer to distance learning. When you talk about homeschoolers, they have projects that involve a multitude of different skills that come together
Mm.
that the kid has to integrate and go and discover and learn on their own and bring together. So they do have a session where they go ahead and have this instructional video on screen, but then beyond that, the rest of it is more hands off around their schedule in a real world environment. Because you got to remember, real world, or I should say, on screen training does not transfer to real world training unless
Mm.
you are a drone pilot and your training happens to be no different than what you actually have to do online in the real world. So with the kids, it's the same thing. We want to make sure that we integrate what they have to use that training for with the actual learning process.
So
So
when kids do go back to school, what can parents do, since school is what it is these days? What can parents do to enhance what their kids experience in the classroom and when they come home?
okay. So school is wonderful for teaching the academics and a lot of the things that are traditionally considered the analytical and IQ type of things, basically. So that actually works out only one side of the brain. and not the other side. And if you look at the academics and the academic world, you see typically that the people that happen to be really high and really advanced and really genius level on those, they tend to be on the spectrum because one side of their brain works super well to compensate for actually the other side that has not been worked or has not been working as much. So as a result, while they really shine in that area when it comes to things that are emotional and social, they end up lacking. So you want to make sure that you kind of maintain this balance. So if the kids do a lot of things that are singular, academic, then at home you want to do more social, you want to do more movements, you want to do things that kind of push them to the other side as well to develop both sides of their brains equally, basically. Because it's not just about the cognitive skills, but that side of the brain also has things inside the body that actually happens and functions as well. And you want to make sure that those are addressed for the kids' health purposes as well.
That makes sense. So uh, lots of kids are smoking pot in high school.
Mhm.
It's rampant. Uh, I grew my kids. I raised my kids in a very affluent neighborhood, and that seems to be even worse. Uh, so tell me about a 15 or a 16-year-old smoking pot every day.
So, first of all, on the topic of marijuana, what ends up happening is we always look at the brain and modulation. So, the brain is the only organ in your body that can control how it wants to perceive the world by
Mm,
regulating what signals it chooses and what, like for instance, you put on your clothes this morning and the signals went away because you don't want to be constantly reminded that you're wearing clothes and they're rubbing on your skin. I mean, that would be too much information, right?
no, no, it totally makes sense. Yeah.
So your brain shuts that signal off, basically. You know that you're wearing it, but you don't have to think about it. So that goes to all the activities as well. When you when something is no longer necessary, when it's not rewarded anymore, then you kind of dump that signal. Now, what concerns me about it is that just like watching screens, it's rewarding, it's easy calories, for the brain. So what ends up happening is you take this substance and it gives your brain a chemical reward. And then as a result of it, everything else will feel dull. So it's not that it's doing your body harm, it's just that by doing that to your brain, then the rest of your life will not be as motivating and stimulating. So that is my big concern on it, basically. So in I forgot the question.
So my question was, what is kids, I know plenty of adults who smoke pot, the way they drink, right?
Mhm.
But I think about the kids in when I also have a rule in my coaching practice. I will not coach anybody who smokes pot regularly. I don't have a moral problem with smoking pot, none of that. It's just I notice that anybody who smokes pot regularly won't do the stuff they're supposed to do. We have a conversation. I charge a lot of money, right? And they say they're going to go accomplish these things. And if they're smoking pot, the weekend's gone. Where if they go drinking, the next day they get up and do their stuff. So I just kind of have that own internal thing. If you smoke pot regularly, you're not going to be coached by me.
I think I
But
just gave you the explanation of
right.
that, basically,
But
right?
but then I was watching my kids growing up, and I watched a bunch of these bright bulbs, light bulbs of kids who sports and just live wires and funny and interesting. And then as they got into high school and they started smoking dope every day, they just got dull. And I watched it, and my son actually, took himself out of that culture, and he said everybody changed, all their personalities changed, so that when he got into his 20s, he doesn't touch it. And I just think about, one, the pot that we smoked when I was a kid isn't the pot that's available today. But the other piece is just what is it, a developing brain of a teenager being dulled that every day. A lot of the parents are like, oh, it's just smoke. We smoke pot in it's high school. What's the big deal? And I want to know what the big deal is, if there is a big deal.
Well, the big deal is that this is the point. This is pretty much the last phase of that brain development that we're talking about. And also, this happens to coincide with the time when they're choosing careers and life directions. Doesn't mean they can't do it later on. But the trouble is that when you kind of all of a sudden take that momentum away, that they have built since first grade moving up, right? Now, all of a sudden, to build that up at an older age when the energy level is lower, and like even like you as an adult, with the difference between 25 and 35 and 45 is tremendous as far as your motivation and your drive. And you take somebody who's 18 and say, all right, well, we're going to go ahead and pick things back up when we're 28 with new responsibilities and a new time in your life. It's a very, very different story. So yes, absolutely. When it comes to the impact of it, it really, really hinders them at a very critical junction in their life. Having said that, though, ever since 12, 13 years of age, kids need to be given the chance to make decisions and then deal with the consequences of their decision. The
Nice,
sooner,
nice counterbalance there. I like this. Keep
the
going.
sooner they go ahead and they start taking action on this, the better they become at making those decisions. Now, the challenge is, and I think, Mark, I mentioned to you for a number of years, I actually was working at a rehab center helping children who were recovering from drug addictions. These were mainly teenagers and young adults. And the difference between the ones that would keep coming back and the ones that said, you know what, I don't belong here, this is the last time. The difference between the two was the sense of responsibility and understanding that they need to change their lives around. And the unfortunate thing is that for some of the kids, as much as we love every single one of them to manifest and fulfill themselves into full individuals that they can be, some of them never make that transition.
And so, what are some of the parenting? What have you seen in the parenting skills that make the difference in the two kids?
So the parenting skills usually happens to be directly related to making the kids responsible for their consequences. Think of it this way. Don't look at a mistake as an opportunity. Don't look at a mistake as something that needs to be corrected. Think of it as an opportunity for the child to learn and for you to be there to support them, basically. But they still have to be able to deal with the consequence. Your support doesn't mean you deal with the consequence for them. So that's the part that, just like kids are transitioning from a point where the parents make the decision and they follow, to one where they have to make the decisions and they're responsible for it. For the parents, is equally as difficult because they are going from a point where they're telling the kids what to do to a point where they have to sit back and watch and kind of bite their teeth as the kids really go through these narrow roads, basically, with cliffs on either side. But the kids have to learn. You just want to be the guardrails as much as possible without intruding their identity and their sense of individuality.
Yeah, when I sent my younger son out into the world, I said, dude, you can make lots of mistakes. Just watch the life-changing mistakes,
Right,
right?
right.
Like there's some things that you can't come back from. So just make sure that you understand the difference there. So you are a wealth of resources for people, especially the fact that you're so online, so people don't have to come and be in this particular area to see you. They can really benefit from what you have. What are you excited about now that you're sharing in the world? What's new and exciting in your baby that you're really excited about?
Well, first of all, I mean, I know that COVID is bad, but for me, this has given me an opportunity because people have automatically tuned in to the online world for resource. So now we are basically in 17 different time zones and helping people. So that to me is really a blossoming of me being able to share my message out with the world. And also, what I'm most excited about is the fact that oftentimes people think things are what they are and they can't do much about it, or that they have to struggle. And the reality is that you don't have to struggle. The resources are more available to you now than ever before. And the reality of it is that you can thrive and you can serve as a role model to all those people around you on how to thrive. So I'm really excited about our lifestyle programs now because what I'm seeing is that the parents realize that when it comes to stepping forward and giving their kids their fair chance at life, the best way to start it is to make sure that they show them in practice what it looks like to lead a happy, healthy, and full life. And then the kids will just be inspired by that. And they're like, when I grow up, I want to be just like him,
They
or
they
her.
don't do what we say, they do what we do.
Yes, exactly.
That's
So,
that's so cool, and I love the word that you use the word thrive, because that's so, this, the name of this podcast is, how to thrive when the world asks the most of you, not just survive the whole thing.
right.
So I love that everything that you have is online and people can find you. I love what you do. I really appreciate that you and I cross paths and I get to share you with the audience. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm totally enjoying this.
Yeah. So every link will be in the show notes. You will be able to find Dr. L, and you'll be able to connect with him and or share him with other people. Please share this podcast episode with as many people as possible. We need help parenting. I know we need help, especially now during COVID. It's so hard for everybody. So just want to let you know, I appreciate your time and your attention. I love you guys. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, guys.